Recording has begun.
Welcome everyone to our class on Derek Funos. We're studying chapter 8, which is a very filled with information chapter. It has quite a lot of parts. Each part, as in everything the Ramchal does, is totally logical. But to master his system, you have to put in thinking time, as he said in the beginning. You just have to take it seriously and go over his structure and individual examples, and then keep it in your head. As we do every week, we start with a summary to get us oriented where we are in the Sefer. The Ramchal makes a dramatic statement that all the Masef Matan, the give and take, the debating process of the Gemara is based on simple mental processes that the mind is by nature set up to do. And our job is to understand these basic mental processes, and then when we read any Gemara, we have to just translate what the information, how the information is presented into a certain set of these forms, and we'll be able to then analyze the Gemara very, very, very clearly. Of course, the Machlokas is what the Gemara is doing at any one point, but at least we'll know, or we'll have a toolkit of all the possibilities of what the Gemara will be doing. And that's a very, very powerful tool. The Ramchal tells us that we can divide the mental processes into 3 parts. There's Havanas Mamarim, understanding statements. We said that the basis of all communication, verbal communication, is the statement. It has its subjects and predicates. We have 3 types of subjects, 11 types of predicates. So the first thing you have to do is, what is the statement on the floor actually saying? Now you have to be clear about that. You have to understand what a subject is, what its predicate is. Fine. The second thing that we'll be doing in our mental processes is taking these statements, adding them together, and making syllogisms or hekashim. And finally, the last process, which is the subject of this chapter, is how to accept or reject a statement as true or false. What does it mean bringing proof that a statement is true or false? Now, the Ramchal explains that statements that you hear are either true, false, or in doubt. They're true if you have a proof that they're true. They're false if you have a proof that they're false. And if you don't have a proof that they're true or false, then they remain in doubt. They're not wrong and they're not right. It's just that we don't know if they're right or wrong. So those are his 3 basic categories of statements: true, false, and in doubt. So once we say that statements have those 3 categories, we come to the natural question is, what do we mean to say that a statement is true because it's proven true or proven false? On what basis do we say that things are, do we accept proof? So he defines 3 different ways that we can determine that a statement is true or false, or bring proof that a statement is true or false. The first set is going to be what he calls mitzad inyano. The second set is mitzad hagadaso, and the third one is mitzad svaraso. What do those things mean? Very briefly, we have what he identifies as contextual proof that they brought from content. That means we have clear proof from as he'll say, from nature, agreement, or heckish, that something is true. That's the content of the statement. The second way we can prove things true or false is not by the content, but by the style, how the statement is said. Is there extra words? We're medaic on language, so if there's extra words, it has to be an indication of flag that something is being transmitted to us. The last way he describes is called svara. He says when proofs are equally balanced, for and against, there is something called svara, which means we tend toward one side or the other, even though the evidence happens to be balanced. We say things are more mustaber, it's this way. And we'll get into the details of that as the chapter goes on. We've discussed already in a few classes the first type of the first branch here, which is proving things true in by their content. And we said that there's three basic categories here of proof that things are true. Either things are proven true because of teva. That means that you don't need any study. The human mind is programmed for certain basic things to be called true, and any healthy person will agree to that. In other words, this sensual perception, things are soft. Everyone perceives that. I don't need any other proof by it, except that that's the nature of the item. In that category, we have really all the basic mental processes. The heckish, for instance, if all men have legs and Reuben is a leg, if Reuben is a man, then he must have legs. Again, if all men have legs, it's a major premise, and Reuben is a man, minor premise, we put those two things together, then he has to have legs. That process called heckish is something that's built into our mind, and it's a Mitzvah. We have the next category, which is haskama, things which are true because a group of people hold them to be true. Either they hold it to be true as public knowledge or common knowledge, or because they have a Masara handed-down tradition that they're true. And for us, the Ramchal says it's very important that in this category we have all our Kitvei Kodesh are considered true. So if a person brings a raya from the Chumash or from the Mishnah or from a person that you can't argue with, so an authority you can't argue with in a Gemara, for instance, so then it'll be true. The last category in proofs that things are true is called heckish. We're going to build a syllogism and show that something is true. And he defines two ways that you can prove something true with a syllogism. It's the direct and indirect proof. What do we mean? You can either show that a statement is true because it is the result of two true premises. If we want to prove that the wife of a Kohen can eat truma, so if we have a pasuk that says all kinyan kaspo, all material acquisitions of Kohen can eat truma, and we have a Mishnah that says a woman is a kinyan kaspo, she's acquired with kesed, then the hektish will produce that the wife of a Kohen can eat truma. That's called a direct proof because it's the result of two true premises. The second way that the Ramchal defines that we can prove something is by actually proving the opposite false. If two statements are really opposites, they don't have a middle point, the Ramchal explains to us, then if I prove the opposite of the statement false and the statement itself is true. And he brought an example where the Gemara wanted to prove that only someone that could do all three Olav sacrifices, you do any one of them, and that would exclude, and since the Kohen Gadol can't do one of them, could therefore not bring Ola B'Yored. So it wanted to prove that by taking the opposite. It said, well, okay, let's say if you could do any one of the Ola B'Yored sacrifices, then you could do the other ones. In other words, even the Kohen Gadol is excluded from the poorest one, but since he can do the rich and the medium, so he could bring in Ola B'Yored. So we said, okay, let's prove that by proving the opposite false. Let's say that, we wanted to prove that the Kohen Gadol, in effect, cannot bring in Ola B'Yored because he can't bring the poor sacrifice. So what did the Gemara do? It said, look, let's take, our statement is that only a person that can bring all three can do any one of them. Let's take the opposite. If it were true that a person could just bring two and still be eligible to bring those two out of the three, so then the Torah should have written the word achas next to those two and not where it did at the end. Since it didn't do that, so we have to conclude that it's false. The opposite is false, that you can just bring some of the Ola B'Yoreds and not and still be applicable to the korban. We prove that false. So therefore, only a person that has all three options can bring any one of them. So that's a question of, again, proving something true by taking the opposite statement and showing that's false. In that particular case, we used a ad absurdum to do that. If A, then B. If not B, then not A. Fine. The second half of the chart is going to demonstrate how to prove things false. And we'll see that there are certain very similarities between the two, because you can also prove something false if you have a proof from Teva, from nature, that it's false. So the Gemara, for instance, had a statement that if a certain comet went through the constellation of Orion, the world would be destroyed. And we see that did go through Al-Pi Teva. So it seems that that statement is incorrect. Nachush goes against it. When it comes to Haskama, we can show something false. Now the Ramchal does not explicitly say this box. So my Chaver, Rav Sackton, did not want to put it in the chart. I just put it in with a note. This finding a Haskama against it. But he does clearly say, if you find a pasuk against what you're saying, so then what you're saying is going to be proven false in our world. The third way that we prove things false is, again, through Hekesh. Now, the first two are similar, but of course can't be the same. You cannot bring a false statement, cannot be the result of two true statements. That's absurdity. But what you can do, and here's where the two sides are similar, is that you can show that the opposite of the statement or a different alternative happens to be true. If I show that the opposite of your statement is true, or a different alternative is true, and there's only one amount of alternatives, so then I prove your statement false through Hekesh. Okay, so if you want to present a statement, and we'll be getting into this little piece here because I'd like to do a little review. We'll show you what the opposite of the statement is, and we'll show you how that the opposite is going to be false, so the opposite is going to be true, excuse me, the statement will be false. The second way that we can prove a statement false is what we're calling the fancy word ad absurdum. I could say that if your statement was true, then we would expect the following result. Since we don't have the following result, then your statement is false. If A, then B again. If not B, then not A. And finally, he's going to discuss the Maman Afshach, where we show you your statement is false because no matter which way you explain it, you will end with a false conclusion. So really the Mamanov is nothing more than B, a ad absurdum, but what we did is we showed you that no matter which way you look at the statement, it's going to lead to a absurd result, and therefore your statement will not be true. Okay, we're going to concentrate on this part of the chart today, and as I said, it's a little bit complex, but only because there's a certain group of parts. But once you think about it, everything is actually very, very simple. But as he warned us in the beginning of the book, it's just a question of getting all the pieces together. That's why I made these charts for everybody, so that we can be clear about where we're holding and not get confused. And also, should be very simple now to memorize the basic formats by looking at the chart. Okay, let's get into this part of the chart, which is today we're going to talk about proving things false by way of Hekesh. Okay. Okay. So very quickly, the Ramchal says that the Raya al Hios Hamamar Kozev, you want to bring a proof to the statement is false, is Gam Yivishlosh Drachim, is also in three ways, as we just mentioned, Mitzad Teva, Mitzad Eschama, Mitzad Hekesh. And Mitzad Teva, he brings the example that if this comet went through this constellation, the world would be destroyed, and we say, hey, we're here, we saw it happen, and the essential perception, we saw it happen, and we're still here, so the statement is proven true, false, al pi teva. Haskama, that's when a kasev, in our world, a kasev or a statement that no one argues about, of a Tana or Namara, goes against our statement. And he brought an example. The statement was, Kol Zuchrecha l'Rabbos Esakatani. The pasuk says all males, means that he can bring this offering, even Chagiga could bring this offering, and it even means the Katani. And we said there's a Mishnah that's a pasuk, Kol Zichrecha, and it's a diuk, and it tells us Kol comes to include the Katani, but the Mishnah says Chutz Mechereshat the Katan is out. So there's a proof, so to speak, at least the diuk from that pasuk is wrong. And then, of course, we're going to solve these contradictions when it comes to the Torah. Okay. Now here's where we want to concentrate today, and that's on bringing hekashim, bringing syllogisms to prove statements false. Okay. So he says like this. Kishiyamotze kasev.
I think we're up to Mitzad Hekesh.
No, I'm sorry. No, Mitzad Hekesh. I just did this one. Okay, let's do the Gimel. Okay. Kesheniri yos hefech hamarma o mischalef mimenu toda emitis mehagama meumetes. Okay, when you want to prove something false, you can't prove it directly, as we said. There's no such thing as a true premise a true conclusion coming from two true premises. It's an absurdity. So if you want to prove something false with a hekesh, it means that you have to prove that the opposite is true. If I prove the opposite is true, then what you're saying is false. Now, I could also prove an alternative is true. If we'll see examples of that. If you say that something is D, as we'll see in 1 second, I showed you there's only three alternatives, the other two, or the other one is true, so this one will be false. Let's go slowly. I'm sorry. I want to repeat that again. Here I gave examples. If you want to prove something, let's say A is B, you want to prove false. That's our aim. So we have to prove the exclusive opposite is false. What do I mean the exclusive opposite? That means there can only be A and not B. If there's a middle ground, then I'm going to have to, if there's an A, B, and C, and I want to, then I'm going to have to eliminate two of the three alternatives. So to prove that, here I say, let's say we want to prove that A is not B. That's what we want to prove is true. A is not B. So if I can show that A is, well, whoops, I'm sorry. I'm going to start again. Okay, it's easy to get confused with the words. Let's go again. I want to prove A is B is a false statement. That's what I did in this chart. A is B is false. So what I have two alternatives. I could either produce A is not B is true, correct? You with me?
Yes.
Okay. Or I can show that A is D is true. If I show that A is D and there's only two possibilities, it's either D or B, so then I've also proved that A is B is false, okay? So I either can prove A is not B is true, that's the opposite of A is B, or I can show that A is D.
Right.
Okay. That's the two ways to do it. Okay. So here I spelled it out. The first way, I want to prove A and B is false, so I show that A is not B is true. So an easy thing to do is to show that it's the result, that means A is not B is a true result from two proven premises. So if all C is not B and A is a C, then A is not a B. That's correct. It's a simple classical syllogism. Again,
Right.
all C is not B, and A is a C, so then A cannot be a B. So that's true. Since that's true, then the opposite, A is B is false. Okay? Or I can prove that the alternative is true. I want to prove that A is B, so I could say that A is really D. I can prove that A is D and not B. Classic syllogism, C is D, A is like C, and therefore A is D. That's proven true. If A is D, and here's the most important part, A is only D or B, we have to prove that true too. There's only two possibilities. Since I showed you that A is D, then A is B is false. Since there's only two possibilities, that's D or B, and I proved one true, the other one has to be false. So those are the two ways that I can prove things false by proving the opposite truth, either directly or indirectly.
So the exclusive
Okay.
alternative is the mischalif?
Yes.
Okay, so the hefech would be the first one, where the opposite of A is not B, or A is B is false, or rather A is B.
Let's go again. What do I want to prove?
Well, okay, in
A and
hefech,
B.
right? In hefech, you want to prove A is B is false.
That's right.
So
how do I do
in all
that?
cases, you want to prove A is B is false. The question is how you're going to go about doing it. So
Right.
hefech,
That's
let's
correct.
look at the opposite of A is not B, or A is B is false,
Yeah,
and the opposite
well,
of
what's
A.
the opposite? Yes, go ahead, spell it out.
So the opposite of A is B is false would be that A is not B.
That's
right.
correct. So if I prove that A is not B is true,
Right, that's the opposite.
that's the opposite. I prove the opposite truth, and this falls away because by the rules of
Right. So the way you're proving,
only
the way,
one
in this
option.
example, the way you're proving A is not B is by finding another A out there. We found an A which is a C, because A and C are the same, and we found that C is not B. since A is C, so therefore we found that A is not B.
That's correct.
Okay, the other way is exclusive alternative, which is to find that C equals D, and A is like C, so then A is D because A is like C. So what is the difference between these two? Because C over here, since C is D, over there we were saying that, okay, so C, just trying to get the difference between these two methods.
Yeah,
So
very important.
right, so the difference between an exclusive alternative is that we're saying that C is like D. Okay, and then since A is like C and A is D, so therefore it can't be B. Okay. In other words, there's a choice that it's either one or the other. Either A is D or A is B. And since we were able to prove that A is D, it can't be B. That's the second one.
Right, right. So it's like if we're using colors, right? I could either say something is white or is what it's the statement that it's white is false because it's not white is proven true. Correct. If I prove not white is true, then the statement that's white is false. Or if it's either white or black, and I prove the statement that it's black is true, then it's also proven false. So that's a question of black is an alternative. It's not the opposite. The opposite is it is not white, and the alternative it is black.
Right.
Okay, that's a subtle difference. But again, in the head, when you work it out, it's perfectly logical. We're just not used to thinking this way. That's why we think this way very quickly. That's the truth about it. But we usually don't break things down this way. But the Ramchal, again, in his genius, he organizes the most simple things into a very powerful unit. So these are the two things. You either prove something false by showing its negative is true, or its alternative is true. Okay. Now, the second way is to use a Hekesh Tolui to show that the statement that you're saying will lead to an absurd conclusion. Okay? It'll lead to a certain. So that's called, it creates a Tolda Kozevis Meforsam, and the word we're using in English is called ad absurdum. You show that you grant the person's position and you show that it's going to create a false result. And since A causes B, not B, not A, that's based on the Hekesh Tolui. Let's go through that again. O keshenira tseis min amarma tolda kozevis meforsam. If you take the statement, you can prove it false by showing that it'll produce a clearly false result. Sha'az nadin shebehechrach hadam gam ken kozevis. So once we see that the hechrach result is false, so then we know that the hadam is false. That was the basic rule of the Hekesh Tolui. If A, then B. If it's raining, the streets are wet. If the streets are not wet, if we deny the consequent, then logically we have to deny the kodem. The streets are not wet and it's also not raining. Okay? Ki kevin shenisbor elono hiyos tolda hahi hemshek shomamrim. Once we have, we say, okay, let's see, check out your statement is true. If your statement is true, it must lead to the following tolda. That has to be proven. Now, hine michok hakodem benimshach shebeheder hanimshach yuchrach heder hakodem. Once I can show that if your statement is true, it must lead to this following conclusion. So if I don't have the conclusion, then your statement is not true. Okay. Let's give that some little letters here and work it out. I again want to prove that A is B is false, but this time I'm going to do it by showing you that A and B causes a false consequent. We call it ad absurdum. Let's spell it out. If A is B were true, then it must be true that C is D. Okay? And that causality must be proven. Since, if we can prove that C is D is false, the consequent, so it must therefore mean that the precedent A and B is false. Okay? If A is B, not B not A. The way I disprove your statement is showing that it's going to lead to a false consequent. And it has to be, of course, that the taliyah, the dependency between the statement and its consequent has to be muchach. Okay? But if that's true, that every time it's raining the streets are wet, then if the streets are not wet, then it can't be raining. Okay. Now, let's give some of his examples now of this these methods of proving statements false through Hekesh. Okay? So we said we can either prove the opposite true or an alternative true. So let's work that out. He's going to give us an example of where the Gemara proves the exclusive alternative true. Remember, I say the word exclusive because if you have more than one alternative, so they're going to have to, you just have to be very careful that you eliminate the extreme and the means. Okay, let's or the other alternatives. Let's try this example. In Baba Kama Pei Gimel, it says the following: Ema Nisa Mamish. Maybe when a person damages someone's body, you have to kill that part of the body. It says an eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, doesn't it? So maybe it means that you really have to do physical retaliation. If you took out someone's eye, it has to be someone's eye. So now we want to prove that statement. The Gemara wants to prove that statement false. So sosru hasvar hazos b'koach raya hazos. So they said the following raya macheshes. They brought a raya that this proof that this statement is false. Lo salkadaitach. You shouldn't think so. That you have to physically take the person's eye out. Why? Because we have a hekesh to the case of a man damaging an animal. Okay? And since the man damaging an animal, we know, is monetary compensation, as it says, and we have a hekesh that puts this case of animal equivalent to the case of man. So then we can derive that man also pays pays for his damage that he does, and does not have to have his eye taken out. Okay. The Ramchal will spell it out. Hine kan sasrua perishal mishamamish. Here, the Gemara wants to bring a raya that you don't physically take a person's eye out. Mishamamish. Why? Mipnehi os nischalfo humama. By showing that an alternative is correct. So we prove that we don't take out his eye through retribution by showing that the alternative, mammon, is true. How do we do that? Because the alternative is a tolda mehadama emitis. The alternative is going to be the result of a true premise. Dahainu, shemaka behema eno ela b'mamon. We know that maka behema is a person who damages an animal only pays money. And he will spell it out. V'ze'agidei mamitzinu sh'zacharnu. And that's using the method called mamitzinu. Miyutzad al echad mikubalas etzleinu. And that mamitzinu was one of our handed-down traditions that we're allowed to learn similar cases one to the other. Sha'anosim she'hupshu ze'egzeh pesuvim l'meidim zemizeh. We can learn pesukim that put together one from the other. So, Atanemar, now we'll say, Naka behema eno ela b'mama. We know the case when a man damages an animal, he pays only with money. That's the alternative. Maka eba adam, when a man hurts the part of a man's body, eye, right, tooth, lomed mimaka behema lefisha b'shlo. We have a hekesh that puts the man and the animal together as far as their damage. Im kain maka eva ba'adam eno ela b'mama. So therefore we prove that when a man destroys another person's part of his body, then he only pays with money. Nimsa zeha perish makayim, v'nista me'ala perish misa. So we set up the alternative is true, and therefore our case is false. In other words, very simply, we wanted to prove that physical retribution is false. We did it by showing the alternative, monetary payment is true. That's the alternative. Okay? So here I did it again. Prove A is B. Prove that the man hurting an animal has to pay with money. Okay?
No, so A is B is false is that he gets
No. You're right. You're 100%. Say that the statement eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth is false. I'm sorry.
Right.
We do that by showing the alternative money is true. How did we do that? We made a mamatsinu. We said an animal pays with money. A man is equal to an animal. And therefore, a man pays with money. Since that's true, and since there are only two alternatives, either money or physical retribution, money or physical retribution, and since money is true, then the statement, since physical retribution is true, then money is false. Okay. Now, normally we don't spell out all those steps, but the advantage of spelling out all these steps will come when we try to remove proofs. We have to know which one of the premises here we're going to attack. Maybe we have to attack, we have a choice here, which ones to attack, okay? We have the first two or the second two. Is there another alternative? We may say, okay. So that's where the strength of this comes in.
Or maybe you can say it's not exclusive. That's another way to disprove it.
That's exactly what we do 100 times. We show you there's another alternative. Okay? We show you there's another alternative. And that's the way we break this type of hekesh. Now, the next part of the chapter will focus on breaking these types of syllogisms. And he'll show us these moves, okay? But when you spell them out and write them out very carefully, then you know exactly what there is where the weaknesses and strengths of the statements are. And you will be able to now destroy, if you can bring a proof against one of these premises, then the whole syllogism will fall down. Okay? Beseda.
I would have never thought of it this way.
No one, very few people do put it that way. Okay? People read very quickly at the speed of light, and because of that, they don't have the conscious tools to disprove what's being said. Okay, and that's the whole idea of the Ramchal. He's bringing everything from the subconscious and conscious, and that's his greatness, really. I mean, a lot of people talk about it, they'll be logic. A lot of people wrote books about logic, both Goyish and Jewish, but he has a very, very worked out system of, like I said, a toolkit to show exactly what you're doing and when you're doing it. And he says it's exhaustive. Now, you're welcome to prove him wrong, but he says he has put in all the basic categories that you need. And if you go through the Gemara, you'll be able to break it down to one of these syllogisms and one of these types of proofs or disproofs. Okay. And it's really the greatness of Ramchal. Among his other greatnesses, that when we showed this to Reb Broidy, he may have mentioned to you, over Shalom, the Rosh Hashiva Chevron, he thought we were talking about Derech Hashem. He didn't know that the Ramchal would work on learning Gemara. Not too many people do, but he did. and it's a, if you take him seriously, which he told you just in the beginning, you will uncover a tremendous amount of clarity. And that's exactly what he's doing here. And there's not too many things to learn. It's just a question of doing it, that's all. Okay, let's give an example now. We're in the box of proving things false, okay? So we said we can prove the alternative false. That was the first way. The second way is to show that the statement will lead to an absurd conclusion. If it's true that it leads to an absurd conclusion, then it itself has to be false. Let's work that out, okay? Ukesham, the Ramchal's going to say. Omicron came, and lo, the Nesina Ella, the mama. They wanted to bring a proof that many times you see Nesina, the word Nasan, in the pasuk, it means mama. The heavy raya negedze. The Gemara brings a raya against this supposition. And it says, Elameata, kasher yiten mum ba'adam, hachinami the mama. When it says, the pasuk, when a man will blemish another man, it's used the word yiten. It also means mama. You can't see the word. You can't see the word yiten means mama.
Sure, question mark.
It means physical damage.
This is a tamiyah, isn't it? Shouldn't be a question mark at the end.
Yeah. Now I make tamiyahs as a exclamation point, and I keep question marks as simple questions like Ketzah Meraglim with Ne'akala. That's what I like to do to make that distinction. Okay. Yeah. This is saying because it's really saying the opposite, right? So it's impossible. It could be mama.
Right.
Now, hine hayamama. Now look what the Ramchal always does. He defines the mama. Hine hayamama. Shekol makom shechasav nesina ritzoni lo mama. Our original statement was any place that the Torah says nesina, it means money. Mikan yotze tolda. So we can now show a consequent. Keshe omar kasev kasher yiten mum ba'adam gam zer ritzoni lo mama. So then when the Torah said when a man gives a blemish to another man, that should also mean he takes his money. Why? Kigam zelosh nesina, because it used the word nesina. V'zed dava shekazbo meforsim. Of course we know it doesn't mean that he steals his money in this pasuk. It's obvious that it means that he does physical damage. Imkain vadai shed ramakozeres. So therefore, if not B, then not A. So it must be that your Hagdama, that every place you use Nesina, it means money, because I just showed you a place where you use Nesina, it doesn't mean money. Now, V'zeh mikol chechesh talo yikazeh, and he spells it out. Im kol Nesina shebetarahi mamon. If every time the word Nesina is used in the Torah, it means money. So gam kasher yiten ba'adam, gam yiten mum ba'adam, u mamon. Then this also should mean money. Kasher yiten mum v'adai eino mammon. This pasuk that says when a man gives a blemish, it's not talking about stealing his money or taking his money or damaging his money. It's talking about a physical damage. Im kain lo kol nesina shebetarahi mammon. So it can't be that the word nesina in the Torah always means money, because I showed you the place where it doesn't. So again, we wanted to prove A is B is false, that all the nesinas in the Torah is money. How do we do it? Because we said that it's going to lead to a false consequent. If A is B, then it's going to lead to a false consequent. What is that? That in this pasuk, yiten mum should also mean money. If A and B were true, you see, if it were true, then C is D would be true. Then in this pasuk, the word nesina should mean money also. Since this pasuk is proven false, it does not mean nesina in this pasuk. So the Hagdama, A is B is false also. Okay, so again, this is a sophisticated type of learning. The easiest types of learning is when we bring a direct disproof. In other words, we bring two statements or pasuk against you. But this is done quite a lot in the Gemara. When the Gemara says "Lo sal kedai," you don't think so, and it brings a false conclusion from from the statement that you're trying to say is true. Now, there's a third way he mentioned in the Hekesh that you prove a statement false. Again, to reiterate, you can either say the statement is false because the opposite or alternative is the result of two true premises, or, as we just mentioned, it results in a clearly false premise, and therefore not B. If B is false, bang, oh, A is false. And here's the third way. Now, the third way really is a modification of the second way. In other words, I'm going to use this ad absurdum, but I'm going to show you that there's all the alternatives. Okay, this is what we call a dilemma, and in English there's a phrase, being impaled on the horns of a dilemma. It's like a bull comes at you with two horns. So you only have two horns on the bull's head, and each one leads to a situation that's no good for you, right? You go to the left, you're going to get stuck, and you go to the right, you're going to get stuck. So that's called being impaled on the horns of a dilemma. We're going to learn a little later on the way that you break that dilemma is by either breaking one of the horns, showing that it's not true that if I go to A, it leads to my bad result, or by going through the horns and showing you that there's another alternative. It's a C you didn't think about. So you either grab the bull by the horns. This is, I don't know if you've ever heard these phrases in English. Grabbing the bull by the horns means solving a dilemma by breaking the if-then relationship. And the other one is going through the horns of the bull, which means you create another way out. Not only A and B, but there's a C. Okay? In our logical makeup, the dilemma which we're going to be talking about is really a Hekesh Machalek, where I say it's either A or B, and it's two Hekesh Toluis. If A, then you're stuck, and if B, then you're stuck. Okay? So that's called a dilemma. And it's really a combination, as we said, of Hekesh Tolui and a Hekesh Machalek, A or B, and two Toluis. Again, the strength of this thing is that once you understand that these are the formats that the information is being put into, then you're able to know ways of destroying the argument. Here, by going through the horns of the bull, by saying, hey, wait a minute, you told me there's A and B, there's a third possibility, or by grabbing the bull by the horns and saying, it's not true, A therefore causes B. It doesn't necessarily cause B. Okay, let's get to the example of the Ramchal. The Yesh min hamofes machish, there's a certain type of Hekesh which denies the truth of a statement. Shekocho chazak ma'od. It's very, very powerful. Vohu keshe niva'er kol hadrachim she'efshar leforesh behem hamamar. You explain all the possible ways to understand the statement. V'nir hiyos kulam kosev b'kulam, and you show all of them are false. Okay. Derech mashal. Let's get to mashal. We have the following. A Gemara in Baba Kama. What I did is I brought a little more of the text of the Gemara in than we did. Also, when we translate in English, we tried to get more of the text in. But since Baruch Hashem, we're together, we can do the text together. I also didn't take the whole text, which is very, very important to do in the Ramchal. By the way, one of the keys of learning Ramchal is to study his examples very well. Okay, they're very well, very, very carefully chosen. Okay, so we want to know, in the end, what we're trying to do is going to try and figure out the case of a person being, his camel is going to fall, and we're going to say that he's patur. That's sort of our aim. Okay, so we said like this. Nishlem akadam mishvachet le dechayev mishum bor. I spell things out in red. These are my notes, of course. Anything in Rashi script is going to be me. Okay, We can see when a person, the Gemara says when a person has his pitcher and he falls, we can see that he's chayav for bor. In two cases, o b'shas nefila. Why? Because this person will hold niskalos b'sheya. If he trips holding a kad, okay, so the card that's on the floor, since then that damages someone, the card then, if someone trips over the card that he just tripped over, he fell, the card fell down, and someone tripped over the card. So he's going to be chayav. Why? Mishum bor. Why? Because niskal is pasheya. He holds that a person who trips should watch where he's going. So once you're pasheya, so you have to pay. Good. Ola acha nefila.
All right, let me just I don't have the case. I don't have the case clear. A card is on the floor.
No, let's do it again. I was not clear enough. A man is carrying a card.
Okay.
Okay.
He drops the card.
He trips.
He trips. Okay.
He doesn't drop it.
Oh, he trips. And because he
fell.
He
trips as he's walking.
Right. And because
then the card broke. Then someone tripped on the card. That's the case.
Oh, okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
So if you hold that tripping, a person who trips is chayiv, so he's going to be chayiv for the damage that the board does if you hold niskalos b'sheya. Okay?
Right. So the niskal here, that's the posheya, is the one who's carrying the card, and he was a posheya by tripping and letting the card go down onto the floor. So when the second person came along and got damaged on the card, the first person, since he was a posheya already by tripping, so he's chayiv now for the damage that the second person got by falling on the card that's on the floor.
Right. Okay. Right. Right. And even after he fell, the Gemara says, well, that doesn't interest us here. After he fell, in other words, there's b'shas nefila here, and there's achar nefila. Okay? What happens, again, I was not clear, I'm sorry. Let's say he trips and the card hits someone directly. That's b'shas nefila.
Okay.
Okay? So since tripping, he was posheya, so he's going to have to pay, right?
Right.
What happens? Okay. What happens if after he fell, the card lands on the floor, and someone trips? That's called achar nefila. Okay. So there, we're going to say even if he's mafkir his nizakah, he's going to be chayav. That's the complicated case of mafkiring your damage after you made it. Okay, but that's not going to interest us. The problem that's going to interest us is that someone says that not only when a man trips is he chayav, but even if an animal that he's leading trips, he's also chayav. Okay, so say you're a camel, you're walking down the street with your camel, and the camel stumbles. Okay?
Right.
So you were chayav because the camel stumbled. That's what we're going to say. That's what we're going to investigate. Someone actually says that. You're chayav because the camel tripped. Okay? So we say like this, Elagamlo, but how could you possibly say that the man who's leading the camel is going to be chayav for the tripping of the camel? Okay, a man is chayav l'yuneh, but what does that have to do with his camel? Elagamlo, bishleim ela'achan nefila, mishkachat lo, b'mafgir, nevela so. The chayav mishum bor. Okay. After the camel falls, and he's on the floor, we can find a case that the owner will be chayav. Okay, what's the case? He's bor in Reshus Rabban has to be hefker, right? So he's mafka his nizakah. He's mafka the nevela after the camel falls. The camel falls, he dies. Knows why? He said, "I'm not too tired. I don't want to bother with this camel. It's not worth anything. I'm just going to leave it here. It's hefker." So there's an opinion that mafke mizakol achrei nefila b'shia is also excuse me, mafke mizakol is chayav. So we can understand that if the camel fell down and died, and the owner said, okay, this animal's hefker, so that's called a boar, and the owner will be chayav. Okay? Aval, b'shas nefila, heiki mishpach alei. How can we find that an animal, as he's falling, is going to be chayav? Okay, so he has his camel. The camel trips and he starts falling, and he lands on someone, and he damages someone. So how do you? The Gemara wants to know, how could you possibly say that he's chayav? Okay, and we're going to make him chayav mishum bor kevin sheniskal behemto onesu. So here's the reason why we're going to have a problem. Let's go again. About gamlo bishlem la'achem nefilu mishkachet lo behefka neveloso the chayav mishum bor. The camel fell again. The camel fell. He died. The man said, "I don't want this camel anymore." So he mafked the camel. Now the camel is a boar. Okay, that's fine. So he's chayav bishum bor, right? Hefker bor, shusarabim. He's got all the qualities, and he's chayav. Good. Ella b'shas nefila. The problem is when the animal falls, as he's falling, he hurts someone. Heicha mishma. How do we find heicha mishkachet lo dechayav? How are we going to find that this animal is chayav? And then I just wrote the chayav mishum bor. Kevin the niskal behema onesu. It doesn't make sense that we should make the owner chayav for tripping. In other words, when the man trips, you'll say he's posher because havilei leune. The man should always watch where he's walking. So you weren't careful when you walked. Fine, we can understand that. But the animal, where do we see that a man is chayav for his animal tripping? The animal, and Rashi explains, elashas nefila hecha igal meima niskal pesheyahu. How could we say that a man is called a pesheya when his animal trips? When he trips himself, we understand it because he should have watched where he's going. But when his animal trips, why should it be chayav? Mahavi, Rashi continues, Mahavi yochel asot im niskal behemto. What he's supposed to do is that his animal tripped. Himself, he can watch. He's posheya, but the animal. Bishlem and niskal hu v'nishba kado. When he falls and the cod breaks and hurts somebody, the man, you'll say, look, you should watch where you're going. But the camel, how can we say that the camel should watch where he's going? He doesn't have that level of consciousness. So why should the man be obligated when his animal trips? Tripping is, for a man, it's pashiyah because he should have watched where he's going. But for his animal, it's called an onus. So
what we're looking for is a case of shas nefila that you chayiv for behema. Because for an adam we understand shas nefila because niskal pesheya, but on a behema that we don't have the concept of niskal pesheya because the man didn't have to watch and the animal can't watch, so we don't have a case of shas nefila for behema.
Right. Very well said. Okay. So that's why I give him the background of the Gemara, because the Gemara only writes from this point on. Omer Revi Acha, Kagon the Avra B'Maya Derech Sharasa the Nahara. Okay, I'll give you a case where the man is chayav. When he walked through the water on the sides of the Nahar. In other words, the banks of the river is slippery. And he took the animal down the slippery bank. So he was pesheya for the animal slipping, right? Because you brought him into a place that was it. Now that's what Rav Acha wanted to state. Now we want to prove. Here we go. We want to prove that statement wrong. we're going to prove to you that it can't be the case we're looking for. Sasru zeba omram hechidam. We knock out the statement, the possibility of Rabbi Acha, by saying, wait a minute, what could the circumstances possibly have been here? Well, there's only two circumstances. I'ika daka achrina. If there was another way to go, besides the slippery path on the side of the river, so Pesheyahu. So he's Hosea. Rashi says, Pesheyahu ve'elo din niskal. We're trying to find a case where the animal is, that he's chayav for his animal when the animal is niskal. But here, if he took him to a slippery place, then it's the man's responsibility. It has nothing to do with the animal. The animal didn't trip. The man took him to a place that he fell down. So that's not the case we're looking for. We're looking for a case where a man is chayav for the tripping of his animal. That's what we're looking for. So it can't be this case if there was another way, because then we say the man is pashut chayav. It has nothing to do with the miskal of the animal. I mean, the owner, he's not chayav for the, you want to prove that he's chayav for the onus of the animal, and he's not. He's chayav for his own onus. Okay. Say there's no other way. There's only one path. So then onesu, then he should be putter, because that's the road. There's only one road that leads to this town and goes through this slippery bank. So the fact that his animal fell it was a dangerous place, and it's not his responsibility. It's an onus, so it should be putter, because there was no other way to go. That's the way everyone's going. V'zenikra gam ken l'manavsha. Let's call it l'manavsha. Again, in our language, what was done here, and again, you see, the Ramchal picked the case which was very far down in the logic of the Gemara. Pashut, we want to find the case where the owner is chayav for the tripping of his animal. So it can't be this case, because if there are other routes, then he's not chayav. He's not chayav because the tripping of an animal, it's a different principle altogether. He's chayav because he put the animal in a bad place. And if there was no other place, so he's pashut not chayav because it's ownership. You could never chayav him here, even though the animal did trip, since there's no other way. Now, in the way we've been breaking these things down logically is by showing that there's only two alternatives. Okay? If there was another way, or if there was no other way. And in both cases, it leads to a result that is not good for us. So that's being called, in English we call it, we have a phrase, being impaled on the horns of a dilemma. We stick him no matter which way. We destroy him by saying there's only two possibilities, and both possibilities lead to a false conclusion. Okay? So, of course, the way to get out of that, as we said, is find another possibility in between, or to show that it's not mukhlaq. That's the way, those are the only two possibilities. That's called going through the horns of the bull, or grabbing the bulls by the horn. Okay? So that's what I said here. We wanted to prove A is B is false, that this alternative of going through the river bank is not the case of Niskal. Niskal is chayav. So we said, well, what could we possibly be talking about? Well, if this is our case, and that's true, so then it must be either there was a way or there wasn't a different way. And since I can prove to you that whether or not there was or wasn't a different way, it's not going to lead to Niskal being Hosea, then your statement is false. Okay. So that's the dilemma. So let's just go quickly and go back to the chart, see what we've accomplished, and then we'll be ready for next class. Again, the benefit of the book really is to just go over it slowly and think about it. And you'll see everything is very, very clear. It's just that we're not used to spelling things out. That's all very clear. So we said today, our discussion today focused on proving a statement false by a hekesh. Okay, I'm just going to make this little marker here since I have it. We'll make it red here. This is the box we've been discussing today. We wanted to prove a statement false by using a Hekesh. And we said that there's three possibilities. One, and the first one has two variations, but it's the same. We have to show that the opposite or all the alternatives are true. Okay? If I show that the opposite of the statement or the other alternatives are true, so then by definition my statement will be false. Okay, again, if it's the exclusive, I get rid of all the alternatives. That's the first way. And the way we've just, then the second way is to show that a consequent will come out of the statement that's false. So I want to prove that your statement is false. I say, well, if the statement was true, then it would lead to the following consequent. So if the consequent is false, your statement is false. And the third way is a variation of that by saying, look, your statement has to be false because it only has two ways that it could be true, and both those ways are false. Okay, that's called Ma'anan Shach. So that's where we've discussed up to this point. And in the next class, we're going to be discussing how to remove these syllogistic rayas. How do you get rid of them? Okay, and this is a very important chapter. It's critical. If you master these principles, then when you come to any Gemara, you should be able to clearly spell out what are the premises and what are the conclusions, and then clearly see where the weak points in the syllogisms are, and watch as the Gemara destroys it or tries to destroy it, and also predict, for instance, why Tosfos will bring up where he will start attacking the Gemara. Everybody is basing themselves on these basic logical principles. This is the amazing thing that the Ramchal tells us. It's something that should be known, but it's overlooked, and it brings tremendous amount of clarity to the Gemara. So once we go through the information, master the information, then we have to do applications in the Gemara, and we'll see more and more and more and more and more that the Gemara is just doing these basic processes over and over again. And that's the reason why the Gemara has lasted so long, because it's based on pure logic. Okay, so we'll stop here.